Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Peter Askim, and I'm conductor of the NC State Raleigh Civic Orchestras. And this is a event that we've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. I'm so excited about the artists and the music and the panelists that are here today, and I'm so grateful that you could all join us for this incredible night of premieres and discussion. We were just talking as panelists right before we started, and this is a really, really interesting group of people that we've assembled tonight. And the music, I think, you'll find to be really powerful, meaningful, moving, and extraordinary. So I just wanted to say thank you at the very beginning to the NC State Department of Music, to the Raleigh Civic Symphony Association for being the homes of these orchestras. And also, we got very generous support from the NC State Sustainability Fund, the Women's Philharmonic Advocacy, and New Music USA, which is a nationwide granting organization. So we're very excited about the wonderful support, and I think you'll see why we were given this support, because this is really important work that these composers are doing and that we're about to share with you. So let me just give you a little background on what we do with the orchestras. So for the last 6 years, we've been doing a world premiere commissioned piece of music on every concert. So this is a piece that we ask a composer to write for us individually, written specifically for us. We work with the composer throughout the composition and rehearsal process. We bring the music to life, and at our performances is the very first time that anybody hears this music at all. And this is a very, very special process. It makes the orchestra musicians part of the creative process. We bring the composers often to work with the orchestras in rehearsals and to speak with the audience at the performances. And that's what we're excited to do today, is invite you inside the creative process of two amazing creators, Tift Merritt and Allison Loggins-Hull. So we've continued this tradition in the pandemic, and in fact, even accelerated it. In the last year, we have commissioned and performed and recorded 9 world premieres. So we're not content to just deal with same old, same old. I'm interested in discovering new music, bringing new music into the world, keeping composers composing, creators creating, and musicians performing. So that's really important to me and to us as orchestras and an institution. So a little bit about this project is in that tradition of inviting composers to create music specifically for these ensembles. I had worked with Allison Loggins-Hull and also Tift Merritt. I had known for many, many, many years, and both are incredible artists. Both come from very different traditions. So Alison comes out of the kind of Western classical tradition, but also has an amazing duo called Flutronics that combines hip-hop with the Western classical tradition. Tift is a singer-songwriter and kind of evades genre, but has come up through that background. And what I felt was that they both had something really important to say, something that they needed to say on a grand scale. And there's no grander scale than writing for the orchestra. Tift and I were talking about the stories that she's wanting to tell through her music, especially the music that you'll hear tonight, and talking about the layers of complexity and emotional depth, all layered on top of each other. There's no other forum or palette that I know of than the orchestra with which to explore really, really complex emotional situations, personal interactions, philosophical explorations than the orchestra. So I invited both of them to create works for the orchestras, Tift for the symphony orchestra and Alison for the chamber orchestra. And independently of each other, I asked them, what would you like to write about? Is there some theme that you want to tackle with this palette of the orchestra? And independently of each other, they both came up with themes which I feel are at their very root kind of tied in our common humanity. They're telling specific stories, but stories that are very, very universal, go to the core of who we are as human beings, and many, many years of stories and accumulated experiences and accumulated humanity. And so it felt more than just coincidence that they both chose topics to write about that had to do with mental health, with issues of telling stories that were painful but too long neglected. And so I asked them to both write this music. We were about to perform it at the beginning of the pandemic. We were very, very fortunate to have both Allison and Tift come to one rehearsal with us back in the spring of 2020, if anybody remembers that. Um, and so the orchestra musicians were able to meet them and to really feel, who are they as artists? What are they trying to say with this music? And then, the pandemic hit. We were not able to bring these pieces to an audience. Over the last year, everybody has been trying to decide what do we do as performing artists. As I mentioned already, we commissioned a lot of composers to come up with different solutions of how do we collaborate when we're not in the same room. And I felt it was so important to have both Tift's music and Allison's music brought to life and brought to all of you so that you can hear it. It's very important music, it's very powerful music, and it was very painstaking to put together. And I just wanted to also say thank you to all of the musicians and all of the people behind the scenes who made this all possible. So the process of putting together the music that you'll hear tonight is everybody was recording at home alone, whether it's into their phone or into their laptops, sending it in with grace and hope that it would somehow fit into the larger piece. And I took all of those pieces and assembled them, mixed them all together, edited them all together. So in a way, these layers of the orchestra are very, very vital and very real in this, because everybody was recording completely alone. And then the only time when they heard the finished product of them playing together is when I played for them everybody assembled together. And in the case of Tift's music, it was 83 different tracks of orchestra music, musicians recording at home together, and all that process of painful self-examination when you're recording at home, when really all you want to do is be in a group making music, feeling the sound together, having that communal experience. So I'm very moved by all of the effort that everybody put in as musicians to make this music come to life. And I wanted to highlight that at the beginning because I think when you hear it all put together, it's easy to forget the labor that went into that by all these individual musicians and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that they had giving their hearts to this music when they were the only one making sound in the room and dedicating it to tape and to recording. So thank you to everybody who made this possible. Thank you to all the people behind the scenes who've made this possible. And so without further ado, we're here to talk to some great artists and to listen to some really great music. I wanted to introduce the first composer tonight, Allison Loggins-Hull. I met her a few years before this project in New York at a workshop with the Imani Winds, where we were both on a panel. And I just felt that she was such an important voice that really needed to be heard, and needed to be heard in the context of an orchestra. So this was her first official large orchestra piece, and I was so glad that we could give her that platform and that palette to work with. And I think you'll be amazed by the sounds and concepts and emotions that she brings to the fore with her music. So Alison, I'd love to have you join us and tell us about your music.
Hi, can
Hey.
everyone hear me okay? Hi, thanks so much, Peter, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. This has been a project that's been overdue, I guess, for some time. And like Peter mentioned, a lot of work went into creating the video and the recording you're about to hear. So I want to thank all the musicians for the work that they put in. I know it's not easy to record at home and to videotape yourself and all that. So I really appreciate the effort that you all put in. Thank you. So yeah, as Peter mentioned, I'm a composer. I'm also a flutist And also, as Peter mentioned, I co-founded a group named Flutronics, which is myself and another flute player who's also a vocalist. And yeah, Flutronics is kind of like a marriage of our classical music training, but also has the influences of other musical stylings as well as electronics. And that really just comes from a place of me being a very I don't know, open music lover. I just, it's something that is very much a part of my voice and very much in my head. I grew up listening to so many different musical styles, and though I was trained in a classical tradition, that's really just one part of who I am as an artist and as a creator. So maybe you'll even notice some of that in the piece that you'll hear tonight, the Inheritor's Overture. So I'm just going to very, very briefly just talk about the inspiration behind the piece. So it's entitled The Inheritor's Overture, and it's about well, it's a kind of a reflection on the idea of transgenerational trauma or inherited trauma, which is the concept of receiving really the trauma of your ancestors from the past. And there are many theories out there, and a lot of research has been done that says that this is in fact a real thing, and these experiences are even embedded in our DNA, which I think is a really fascinating subject to explore. So the piece, in writing the piece, I did some research. I discovered a book by a woman, a researcher named Dr. Gita Arian-Bach, and the title was inspired by her book. Her book is called The Inheritors: Moving Forward from Generational Trauma, and also some chapters from Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which is by Joy DeGruy. And what was interesting, both of their research in talking with people and citing their experiences, they both cited how oftentimes this trauma or these incidences, Gita's book explored her family's experience with the Holocaust, and post-traumatic slave syndrome is a reflection on slavery here in the United States. But they both cited several times about how these incidences of trauma are things that are, for those who've experienced it, they didn't really talk about. It was very much held inside, kind of like, leave that back there. I want to move forward. I don't want to discuss it, which is completely understandable, but can be a little bit complicated if you're coming from that lineage, because so much of that experience can actually explain a lot about yourself. So I thought that was really interesting, and there were so many parallels there. And both of these texts are really great, and I highly recommend to everyone here. And I also cited quoted a few pieces of music. The first is a Negro spiritual that's called "Lord, How Come Me Here," which is really quite literal. In the song, the words are, "Lord, how come me here? Oh Lord, why?" In other words, like, why am I in this situation? Lord God, help me. Please explain to me how I ended up here in this place. Very simple melody, but still very profound at the same time. And then I also quoted a second song, which was written during the Holocaust. And the title of that song, please excuse my German, is Die Lebendenstein, which was a phrase used to describe the prisoners of the concentration camp Mauthausen, Busen. And the title literally translates into the working stone, the living stones. So to kind of describe the prisoners and the labor that they were forced to do. So what was interesting, the two passages that I quoted in those songs, they worked really well together in this really interesting way. So there are sections of the piece where they're kind of like a mashup of sorts, which is really interesting, and serving as melody and counter melody, and you'll hear that throughout the sections. But I thought that also kind of was interesting, as the two books that I read and the experiences that I read also were very intertwined and similar in many ways. But in the end, I didn't want to do something that was all doom and gloom, because I do believe that these experiences also explain a lot of our inner strength as people who are descendant from ancestors who had these experiences. I think there's a lot of just kind of strength and the ability to just kind of overcome adversity that comes with that, and this really formidable like optimism as well, and way of being able to forge ahead and look forward and build for the future, and just overcome all of that. So I'm going to end there. uh, you'll hear more in the piece, but yeah, that's the Inheritor's Overture kind of in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks so much.
Sure.
Allison, every time I hear that, it's just so powerful. So thank you so much for writing it. Having heard it hundreds and hundreds of times now, um, it doesn't lose its power. And I'm so grateful to you for writing that for the orchestra and for, following it through to this end. I'm so glad everybody here is getting a chance to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for making it possible.
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so
Great.
much.
Of course. So, the second composer that we're featuring tonight, and I should say, we'll be joined later by a panel discussion, and we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. So please do put your questions in the question and answer box, and we will try and get to those after we're done. Um, but for now, I wanted to bring in Tift Merritt, who's an amazing singer, songwriter, multi-talented, interdisciplinary artist. And I first came to know Tift's music many, many years ago, probably uh, 12 or 13 years ago. I got a mixtape, which is appropriate for her if you know her music. She has a great song named Mixtape from KGSR, I think in Austin. Or I was living in Austin and got this kind of compendium of lots of really great new music, and I heard this song by this singer-songwriter named Tift Merritt, and I was amazed, and I said, I have to find this person someday, and I did multiple times across the whole country. So I saw her play live many times in San Diego and in LA and in Maine and many times here in North Carolina. And I immediately knew that this was somebody who I felt a real affinity for as an artist. I felt the humanity that she had when she was writing music and singing her songs was really close to the surface, and it was really honest, and it was really coming from a very deep place and a big soul. And so I eventually moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and she moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where she's from. And we kept in touch and said we should do something. And then we became neighbors. She moved literally 2.5 minutes away from my house. I walk past her house all the time. And like with this whole project, it just felt more than just coincidence. It felt like fate that we would do something together. So I started talking to her, and she told me about this project that she had, which you're about to hear two of the selections from, two of the songs from. And I'll let her describe it to you. But right away, I felt like this was much more than just songs. This was not just like rock and roll songs on an album, and there's nothing wrong with rock and roll songs on an album, and that's how I got to know her, and that's what I listened to most of the time. But this was something bigger. This was about humanity. This was about stories that go back for hundreds of years and shared trauma, and so important to bring it to, like I was saying, about the different layers of the orchestra and the subtleties. And so, Tift, I would love to have you talk a little bit about your project.
Peter, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And Allison, that was just stunningly beautiful. Congratulations to you and to the orchestra and to Peter for that gorgeous performance. It's really an honor to be here with both of you. And as Peter said, I moved back to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was questioning what a rock and roll song should do myself, both as a normal artistic itch to push form forward, but also as an answer to a question about how I was going to manage being in a band on the road and being a mother. And I also, this was a period of time where it was it's like now you can look at the world and say, wow, the world is madness, and I feel very helpless to respond to it. And those of you who are at state know well Dorothea Dix Park, which is a former asylum that is being reconstituted as as a public central park, which is a wonderful and also very daunting idea, because there is so much to be metabolized in a site-specific and community way in order to transition from a place where we sent erased and banished and criminalized margins to a place where we can all feel good about our our society. So something akin to, I wonder how much sage they are going to have to burn there. I just started thinking about this space and how Jung has a theory that that which we cannot accept within ourselves and push away is actually our prophetic essential knowledge that will make us whole. And if we don't deal with it, it becomes emboldened and empowered. And that happens on an individual level and on a societal level and a collective level as well. So it was very easy to say, wait a second, we are the ones living in an asylum in a world of dislocated and virtual reality and school shootings and criminalized margins. Who are we to say who is sane? And I'm going to go to this site looking for this lost wisdom. And I believe in creative process as research, and I didn't know what I was going to find. And I still don't. But I just started pulling the thread, and I quickly found that in the archives, the medical archives, the first person experience of these erased people was not within those archives. And so I started collecting objects and what I call lyrical presences, which are places, liminal places, where we are, that conjure all the layers of life as we experience it, the vast world, the emotional world, the real world. Lyrical presences make all of that immediate and inevitable. And so the song that you are going to hear is from a first step that I took based on an object exhibit where I wrote actually with a public historian from state. She did factual research on each object, and then I created a lyrical counterpart, and we juxtaposed the two. And I was also trying to create a world where the man-made reality was not the final say, where Mother Nature and the trees and the river and the earth were watching sort of our mad cycles. So this is based on a photograph of a woman's grave that I found, and a very, dressed in flowers. And it felt so much like a metaphor for just how many lives were just turned around in one diagnosis, whether it was medical or typhoid or scarlet fever or poverty or whatever these supposed causes were. This was a verdict, and these people's lives never recovered. So thank you to Peter for the unbelievable arrangement, and thank you to the orchestra, and I hope that you enjoy it. It's called On My Way.
Thanks so much, Tift. And I'll just add that we put together a few slideshows from the rehearsal that we were able to do with you. We have a video for your second song, but we have some still photographs taken by Aaron Zanders. I wanted to say thanks for that. And just watching these pictures go by of when we were in a room making music and people were smiling and playing this incredibly powerful music, but also uplifted by your presence, Tift, and being together. I also think that that's really powerful to see too.
On my way, I was on my way. On my way, I was
Tift, thanks so much for that gorgeous music. It was just such an amazing experience after, admiring you as an artist for such a long time, um, to get to know you and then to just be able to go from the inside out in your music and kind of imagine these soundscapes that it kind of resonated in me when I heard your songs, and I still remember the you singing these to me, and it's just amazing music.
I think I oftentimes consider myself a writer first and not a virtuoso musician. Um, Although I think after enough time and band practice, I'm not a hack. But
You're not a
um,
hack, Tift.
one of the things that I have been thinking so much about and working with the orchestra really drives it home is that linear narratives really cannot hold the the complexity of the stories that we need to tell and the stories that we are telling right now, and that you do need, whether it's lyrical juxtaposition, and obviously music can say so much without being reduced to words. So thank you very much for bringing the power of the orchestra and your orchestration to to this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was really a gift. Thanks, Tift. And I think that's a great bridge to our panel discussion, talking about how music and storytelling and um, all of these different ways of confronting these hard and difficult topics, but topics that we need to confront. So I just wanted to introduce. We've already met Allison and Tift, and I just wanted to introduce our moderator, and our other panelist. So Deb Royals is our moderator today. I'm super grateful to her for um, leading us in this discussion about this. Deb's a member of the board of the Raleigh Civic Symphony Association, and really grateful for that. She holds a PhD in performance and cultural studies from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's the founder of the Justice Theater Project and a core leadership member of Pure Life Theater Company. So welcome, Deb. Great to have you. And our other panelist, who I'm really grateful to have as well, is Dr. Brianna Parker. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Educational Leadership, Policy, and Human Development's Counselor Education Program at NC State University. Her research interest focuses on stories and experiences of violence and trauma within Black communities, especially for community members occupying multiply marginalized positions. Healing and pleasure practice for survivors and victims of interpersonal violence, and cultivating a social justice-based counseling training curriculum that embodies the lived realities, strengths, and power within communities historically disenfranchised and oppressed. Additionally, Dr. Parker focuses on how mediums such as storytelling can inform counseling interventions, education, training, and future research within different communities historically overlooked by academia. So I'm so grateful for all of you to join us. When we first conceived of this project, it was going to be before a live audience, and I knew that a panel discussion about all of these issues was really important, talking about the creative process, but also talking about the context of this music. So, Deb, thanks so much for being a part of this.
So thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with everyone and to have this conversation with Dr. Parker and with these amazing artists, including you, Peter. So I'm going to turn to you first. I know that this work took many, many hours of work, and you were tasked with taking something that originally was going to be a communal event where we would be in person and experiencing this. So my question is, or my first question to you is what has it been like to go through this journey to pull what was going to be communal and make it ready for the virtual, and to do it with such two very different women, different artists, different backgrounds, and who bring this incredible depth of experience into their music. in different ways as well. And what are your feelings with regard to that journey?
Sure. Well, I come back to what I was talking about a little bit at the beginning of this, is that this was music that was written for people, and this was written for people to play together and in a room where they were sharing that experience and they were feeling the sound vibrating together, and they were partaking of this communal experience of being part of the creative process. And it was important to me, that's not the same, when everybody's playing alone at home. But it was important to me that we kept that vision throughout this process, which was difficult. There was technology involved, there was frustration involved, and really we all wanted to make music together. But it was important that this music saw the light of day, and I think that you can hear now why. And that these two very different artistic visions who have so much in common, I just feel, that we could share in their vision. And so it's almost was kind of like a process of freeze drying, so we took this beautiful artistic product, we got a chance to make music in the same room together. We had to kind of distill it down to the individual particles and then reconstitute it electronically and through technology. And I think it's important, and I think it's a big success. I know that Tift has been just very moved, and Allison too, about all the effort that went into it from all these different musicians. And so going through this process with the two of them and with maybe 150 musicians who were involved, it's important. And I think I just feel gratified that you can all hear the original vision. You can hear all of the hard work and all of the passion that went into it, but also the humanity that went into it.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful segue. First of all, I have to say that I always believe that God's timing is perfect. And so I have to say that out loud. And I do believe that there is something in this music and the way that we're having to share it now that I hope will have an even bigger reach as far as the people it can impact, who, like the musicians, all of the musicians, and when I'm speaking about this, Tift, Allison, Peter, I can't even imagine what it must be like to hear the music when it's all put together and the emotion of that. It's like we've all been isolated in some way, shape, or form this year and have been bore witness to all kinds of additional trauma that came along with the things historically that happened in our lives this year. And if we believe that shared humanity is a profoundly important aspect of performance, Alison, what do you hope that your piece of music does within the hearts and minds of your audience regarding shared humanity? And if you want to pull something even broader, like our past year's experience, or just this piece of music, like what do you hope that it does or creates with regard to our shared humanity and the feeling of that?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. Well, lately, in a lot of the music that I've been writing, in addition to this piece, the Inheritor's Overture, I've been very interested in responding and or reflecting on individual narratives or an experience, a human experience, in the hope that it can inspire dialogue, it can inspire empathy amongst listeners. My hope is that we can, through actually seeing or hearing in this case, these stories, it can put like a human figure to it, and it doesn't feel so like abstract, like something you just may have heard about or read about in a history book, but in fact is something that is real, is something that affects like living people even to this day. I find that, when you can kind of hear a story that is coming from an individual, for example, it feels more real versus when you hear about it happening to like a mass of people. And even though this subject matter in this piece in particular is something that has affected massive amounts of people, I was hoping to kind of zero in on it and make it feel a little bit more like a personal storytelling rather than, yeah, this thing happens to so many. I just find that we as people can tend to relate more when it feels more individualistic or a little bit more like personal in that way. And as it relates to the world right now that we're living in, and all of the things that are happening that are so heavy, and yes, very traumatic to like so many people. My hope is that we can look at that and see like, okay, yeah, perhaps it is possible that these incidences that have happened do have a long lasting effect, on people, because we're going through this thing right now, and I think we can all safely say that this will probably have a lasting effect on a lot of us, on our children, on students, on every generation, every person, every background, every demographic, right? So that is my hope, just to kind of highlight the experiences and tell them in a way that is coming through a human lens.
So with regard to this idea of storytelling, Tift, I know that you are a creative writer, and I feel like, or that's a part of who you are, is as writing is a part of who you are. And your music, including the words, the libretto, the sung words, that it feels very much like it feels like it's trying to tell a story. The music, the words are rife with emotion, all kinds, pain, joy, darkness, light. Can you explain the journey you've taken to find these words, this music that explores the emotional history of Dorothea Dix Hospital, a former slave plantation, mental institution, and now a place where you can get your picture taken with the sunflowers, right? So if you would share a little bit more about how you found those words.
Well, I'm still finding those words, and I think that it will be a process of trial and error that goes on for a long time. But I think the first thing that I can say is that it's from a writing point of view, just looking straight at it and trying to wedge it into a linear narrative was not adequate. And so I do enter music through words. I find the music through the words. I don't, I mean, it's a process. It isn't like you go stamp them on the music and that, but the words come first. And I really just had to start juxtaposing things that I found. For instance, I found a moth in an intake record, and I realized, the moth was just stuck there in the pages, and that image spoke more profoundly to me than anything I could write about it. And it was really at that point where I said, I am not looking for the historical facts or the reported facts about this place. I am not beholden to facts. That's what historians do. I'm looking for true and lyrical presences. And that's sort of where that idea of lyrical presences came from, that just instances where the real world was making granular our questions and making questions of larger meaning inevitable. And I just started collecting them and placing them side by side and rearranging them. And uh, it's a really different way of writing, but I don't, I think that when you are looking at really traumatic things, using just a regular linear entry point is not adequate. And I don't know how to say it more than that, except that I'm learning a lot as I go about words and music and how they can work together. And also I'm looking at performance responsibility, and community responsibility and my positionality within that. And I think that, popular music for as just a catch-all, uh, can do a lot better than it does just trying to hang around and say, hey, look, don't I look cool on my Instagram? I mean, we need to do more with our work, in terms of what a 3-minute pop song can accomplish.
I have some thoughts around that, but I have to go to the thought I had before, the one that's tearing away in my brain right now. But I want to turn to Dr. Parker, because Dr. Parker, I know that you've been able to utilize narratives or stories as a pathway to healing. And I really firmly believe that telling our stories, whether it be through music, through words, through performance of some sort. I often believe that in that place where performance happens, whether it be the visual artist or the musician or the actor, that's a liminal space of possibility. And what I mean by that is that we kind of allow ourselves to whoosah a minute and just take in what we're experiencing. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how storytelling is such a powerful way to tell truths, to share truths, and why should we tell these stories?
Thank you, Deb. And so it's so interesting, when I was reflecting on and listening to this music, thinking about how many stories, and how much joy I get from hearing stories. I talk about this with some of my students, and I talk about the fact that like the person who taught me to be a storyteller was my mom and my grandma, because they always had these hilarious stories. But as a kid, it was just kind of like, wow, these like weird antics of these older people. But as you keep hearing them and you get a little older, you start hearing kind of how these kind of constructed realities and moments in time and what was happening around them. And you get a snapshot of who they were at that point in time. And I think there's something really powerful about the way that as individuals, as communities, as people in general, we story our lives anyway. And so it's really, from my work as a counselor, as well as a researcher who looks at particularly stories of people experiencing harm and violence and mistreatment, but then also hearing stories of like hope and resilience and resistance and triumph. It really kind of expands how you even understand like the lived experience, and how it's just a very creative and beautiful way to kind of talk about what's happening right now for a person, but also what they've experienced. And I think about, for a lot of people, specifically the Black community that I work with, um, music as well as like storytelling is, within our DNA. It's an opportunity for resistance. It's an opportunity for most people who've experienced different forms of oppression, as well as forced silence and like repressing who you are and repressing so much a part of yourselves. Music and being able to tell stories and to have these stories kind of like go through generations, is really providing an opportunity for connection for people. And so I think about the fact that there are stories about people I've never met, ancestors I'll never have an opportunity to like know, in like a factual sense because they weren't included. when it comes to like traditional forms of like record keeping. But I remember these stories about my great 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 grandma, like, being this great entertainer. I know this story about this other person who used to like build all the family houses. I know this person who was really good at cooking and how that was a big deal. And they named dinners after this person. And so I do feel like for a lot of people, whether it's your family or whether it's ancestors, whether it's people that you're informing now, essentially stories kind of instill connections between the people that, you haven't had a chance to meet because they're no longer with us, but also for the people that you hope to inspire in the future. And so I definitely think stories, especially for people who are healing, who've had these past experiences, being able to author it themselves and not be defined by what other people would say their experience are, what they've taken away from them, is truly healing. And it's a big part of counseling anyway, with like biblio counseling, where you're actually having people read books as part of, kind of let's talk about what you're experiencing and have discussions on it, or having somebody kind of act out something and keep telling a story until they can see themselves as being the agent, or the person who has agency and autonomy, who can feel empowered and being able to tell a story in a way that's true for them, versus that kind of being imposed on them. So it's really beautiful the way that being able to tell your story and having a space and opportunity to tell your story really opens people up to kind of seeing the possibility around their wellness and their well-being, as well as their healing.
So for both Tift and Allison, I have this I had this visceral response to Allison's piece, but I think that both of your work has this expansive feel, like it's traveling, like I could feel my body literally moving, or buzzing, or vibrating. And for both of you, as this music lives beyond this moment, I mean, again, I'm just so grateful that we have this recorded, and many, many people beyond this moment can experience this, take it in, engage with the music. But as this music lives beyond this moment today, what do you hope people understand more deeply and more broadly with regard to marking history, making history, including making history with the arts, akin to what we're doing today, and becoming more, becoming more. And it doesn't matter to me, Tift or Allison, which one would like to share a response to that first?
I'll go first. Well, that's interesting. Well, first, let me just say, I'm really happy to know that you had that kind of reaction listening to this music. My favorite type of music is the kind of music that causes that kind of response. So thank you. It excites me to hear you say that. It's really a compliment. Well, I can really only speak for myself, I think. And I personally do feel as an artist that I have a responsibility of sorts to respond to, what's going on around me, to pay attention to what's going on around me, and to use my talents and my platforms as a way to kind of amplify stories or experiences that need to be told. So I feel a serious calling to do that with my work. So I guess in that way, that's how I'm trying to, I guess, like mark where we're at. And I think it's important from a historical perspective. I mean, there's so much music, art, all kinds of art that do just that are responsive to what was going on, at the time. And when you think about, gosh, like what if those pieces didn't exist? it's kind of even hard to like wrap your head around even. So I think it's super super important to make work in that way, because it is history, you know, or will be history in the future. Um, and it is about the human experience, and it is reflective of human possibility and expression and all of that. So um, so yeah, I mean, again, I think I can only speak for myself, but that's truly how I feel about it. And I think also, I mean, with music, you know, not everything that I do is necessarily rooted in that. I definitely have some music that I've written in the past, which is very much more just about like having fun and having a good time. You know, that's important too, right? But you know, I think there needs to be a balance. You know, everything in moderation. And I think an artist does need to just have their eyes open, you know, and allow that to either inspire them or inform their work. I know it does for me. So
And your thoughts around that, Tift?
Tift, you're muted. Tift, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, my daughter was screaming and I muted myself. Um, you know, I think as a writer or a musician, I always want a distance to be traveled. You know, I want, as the writer and as the performer, to enter at point A and come out somewhere different. And I want the audience to go on that journey in their own way with me, so that they start at one place and come out changed, however subtly. And I also, I don't know that I always had the words for this, but the layers are really, layered meaning is what is really intrinsically interesting to me. And I think layers are what oftentimes dominant narratives and easy answers iron out. And it's really important to remember that every moment and every point of view has a multitude of layers that are worth going on the archaeological dig for understanding. And you know, I have this great metaphorical archaeological dig in the asylum here, and asylums really across the state of North Carolina. And I also want to say that I think, um, you know, I'm very conscious of the fact that I've never been in an asylum, and I'm not schizophrenic, but as a, you know, you know, I'm not trying to reclaim a story that is not mine to reclaim. But as a community member navigating shame around an asylum, and the generations which have pushed that forward or haven't pushed that forward, you know, I am a member of that. And I think it's very important to look outside yourself and try to understand and try to penetrate what has been told to you about how things are. And that's a great place to start trying to make something, you know, or trying, it's just going towards the questions, um, without want for an answer, but with an honest want for the question beyond the question in front of you.
Dr. Parker, I have a question that's kind of bubbling up for me, and I know I didn't put this one on there, but I think this is an important question because it relates to, number one, the responsibility of artists. And I think historically artists have always responded to the world that they're living in. They talk about it, they engage with it. And most often they're seeking to talk about some truth or some reality or trauma or historical moment or pain or joy or whatever that is. And in light of, you know, I think about, I'm born and raised Kernersville, North Carolina, grew up on a farm. And there's not a whole lot of history that is shared with regard to places like Dorothea Dix. Houghton Mifflin missed it with regard to some of our facts and some of our truths with regard to our history here in the United States, not just North Carolina. And so I'm wondering if is this a pathway to healing, or one of the ways to navigate ourselves towards healing in moments like this, especially if you wrap it with this kind of conversation? And I'll flip that over.
Yeah. I definitely think it is. I think one of the things that I've read about a lot, and I've experienced myself, as well as working with different people, whether it's clients, students, or just people, or just community members, is that the key part of healing is revealing the truth, and not kind of the big T truth. As we talk about this in research all the time, like there's a big T truth, which is often the dominant narratives, usually kind of housed and enclosed with his story. So thinking of white cis heterosexual presenting men, oftentimes the people who have the privilege to be able to write stories, are oftentimes purposely deciding what we're focused on, what we're looking at. And a big part of radical healing is being able to kind of hold both this idea of like exposing the actual little T truths, like the multiple subjective truths of people who oftentimes their reality is never captured. And it's not because they're not telling the story, it's not because they can't speak up, or that because, you know, they don't have narratives. It's just that for for a long time, and even now, there are specific people who get to decide what narratives we have access to, and what narratives we get to tell. And I do think there's an important part of healing that requires us to kind of look at all of these narratives, the good and the bad, the things that make us feel very uncomfortable and make us feel kind of like that weird feeling in our gut when we hear it. And there's a responsibility there to open it and look at it, and truly to examine it. Because I remember one of my professors used to say, like, when we would learn something and we would kind of go through this like anguish of like, oh, dang, now I can't not see this form of racism or fetishism of the AAPI community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Like he talked about it as like, once you know, you can't unknow. And a part of healing is getting the knowledge part, kind of digging out the things that we don't see purposely, for the sake of like, now that we have everything on the table, now that we're clear about the things that we've chosen to forget, or things we've chosen not to care about that wasn't in front of us, now we get to do something with it. And I think that's the truly healing part of it, is that not only am I going in more conscious of what was happening around me and among me, that I didn't have to see it, but now I get to do something with it. And what an empowering place to be, is that I can do something. It doesn't have, you don't have to solve every problem. It's not an easy process, it's a lifelong journey. But I just think there's something important about the awareness of stories. And I think the reason why we continue to tell stories generationally is because at some point we want to change the course of history. And talking about intergenerational narratives, like Allison talked about, there's also generational curses. And that's the essential, like there's these issues and these experiences of trauma, and there's a repression of it. And so it gets into our bellies, into our wombs, it gets into our consciousness, and we keep passing that forward, whether that's biologically, whether it's saying certain things, whether it's, kind of reacting to things in certain ways. And so the next generation has to essentially keep solving or grappling with issues that have never been spoken about, that have never been examined, that have never been dealt with or grieved or experienced fully with our whole bodies and our whole spirits. And so one of the ways that we talk about generational curses and violence is that a lot of the women I spoke to, were like, I'll do your research because I want to end the generational curse of silence around my experience of violence and trauma. And it was really difficult to sit with those stories, not only for them, but for me, because these people look like me. We have some shared experiences, some shared history. And so one of the things they talked about is that, you end generational curses by doing something different, by changing the narrative. And so, yes, in our families, we oftentimes never talked about this person who was horrible. Yes, in our families, we did experience molestation. Yes, we experienced lots of violence. Yes, some of us were perpetrators of violence. And those are really hard little T truths. But the more that we start exposing those, we start becoming very clear of the complexity even within those stories. And I think that humanizes not only the people within our families and our communities, but it makes stories a lot more richer when we don't see them as being black and white, but like gradations. And so I do think we have to we have to start exposing the truth, and the whole truth, not just the truth that's easy to access, but the counter truths that are happening as well. And I think there's a great opportunity to do that.
So this was one of the questions that I had for Peter, and I'm going to go back to it now. Before the concert took place, Peter and I spoke yesterday, and he said that his instinct said to him, after the whole pandemic and not being able to do the concert and making this still available, his instinct said, this is the good, right thing to do. And so I'm wondering, is what your hopes are through the lens of influence of legacies of intergenerational trauma and evolution of mental health treatment in the US, what is the story better yet, your instinct, what were you hoping to tell or make happen or shift? Maybe not necessarily change, but shift through the experience of this concert and this discussion.
Well, I thought it was really important that we hear these stories and that we hear this music and that we have this discussion. And like Dr. Parker was saying, the little T truths. I think, both Allison and Tift really bring that across to us in very powerful ways that we can't always access with words. But I think all of us as human beings have little T truths, and we all have histories. And I think that both pieces are very specific, but both pieces are very universal and about all of us. And I think that that's the thing that's most important, is that we hear the little T truths, and share those and process them. And art can help us do that, I think. So that's why I feel it's so important that so many people gave so much of themselves, to bring these stories to life. So, yeah, and I'm just so grateful to all of you for your parts in making this happen. It's really very powerful, I think.
Incredibly so. And so I know there's a couple questions now, and Peter, you were going to field those, but the other thing I have to share with both Tift and Allison is when I first listened to the music, and I was able to listen to it before today, and I think it was just this beautiful. There was also, I felt like the pieces were talking to each other, and again, I'm like, my body is like experiencing the journey, and I feel like there's a conversation that's been had. And so on that note, all I can say is that I'm beyond grateful to sit in your presence, Dr. Parker, to hear all the work you're doing, and to know that, I think we've been given this golden opportunity to tell the truth whenever we get the chance to tell the truth. And as artists, our way of telling the truth often comes through our work, including the work that Dr. Parker's doing. And so thank you for continuing to tell the truth and letting me be here with you tonight. So Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll have some time for questions, and we have one more piece of music by Tift, which is called "Ground is the Memory," and I won't try and describe what it's about, but for me, it's a, me personally, I feel like Mother Nature is seeing all of these stories, all of these truths, and processing all of these truths. And there's something much bigger than all of us um, that that is watching everything that's happened and that continues to happen. But Tift, tell us just a little bit about this before we hear this, and then if you do have questions, we'll hear that we'll talk about your questions after after we play this video.
Well, this song is called Ground is the Memory. And, again, I was just trying to pull out of the man-made world where we have granted ourselves the authority to say what is and what isn't, and what is sane and what is not, and what is right and what is wrong, without much questioning. And pulling back from that, I think of the trees as the witness, and as Mother Nature is this very ancient force of love, the great mother that's kind of laughing at man and his God having this side conversation that maybe doesn't matter, and the ground as sort of metabolizing everything, the bones, the deeds, the words. It is the bank of memory, and in fact the archive that does not leave anything out. So
Thanks so much, Tift, for that amazing music. Every time I hear it, I get goosebumps, and just especially tonight, after talking about all of this with all of you, it just really means so much. And seeing everybody there playing together for a common cause, it's very powerful. Yeah. So I wanted to thank all of our artists and panelists. We'll be able to take a few questions. And then before we do that, I just wanted to say thanks again to the NC State Department of Music and to the NC State Sustainability Fund, as well as the Raleigh Civic Symphony Association, New Music USA, and the Women's Philharmonic Advocacy. So many people, so many institutions came together to make this all possible. So to go to your questions, we have a few, and we've sort of distilled a couple of them. If you have things that you'd like to ask our artists and panelists, please put those in the Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. So a couple questions. Do you think that these pieces have a role in facilitating healing among communities experiencing collective trauma? Describe music's role in healing processes. And we'll put that out to all of you.
Hi, I'll just jump in and answer quickly. What I hope, with my piece anyway, I really wanted to have also a heroic edge to it as well. That is like symbolic of like resilience and strength, as I mentioned earlier. So my hope is that this music can shed light on that. Like, yes, some horrible things have happened, but at the same time, there is strength that comes in surviving these things. And that is something that should be celebrated, I believe. So that's at least my hope that is conveyed in my piece, and a message that I really wanted to bring across along with the story of what happened. There is a positive kind of thing that can come out of it, as long as it is dealt with, as Dr. Parker was mentioning, acknowledged, right, and hopefully healed from. So
I'll just jump in and say that usually at 9 o'clock at night, I don't have really adequate answers for questions that big. But I also think it's really important for me personally that I not make very big presumptions about what my work is or isn't going to do. But I believe very much in pulling stories close and spending time with them, the same way that I pull my instruments close and spend time with them. And that I don't know what's going to happen, but something usually does. And that's a form of love and respect that I want to bring to these stories. And I don't know what the outcome is more than that, but that's what we do for our loved ones and our friends and the things we care about in this world. So that's what I bring.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
My daughter is really crying. I might have to go check on her in 1 second.
Well, you've shared so much with us. You've done more than we could ask for. So, another question we have is, would you say that making this music virtually was a process of healing for the musicians and composers involved, given the challenges and isolation presented by the global pandemic? And I would, just to speak from my experience of how the individual musicians communicated to me that they were doing, it was difficult. Playing music alone and recording alone is a different process than it is sharing music together. putting yourself, when you record yourself, you put yourself under a microscope and you hear only the mistakes. And especially if that's not why you do music to share the joy and share the community and share something bigger than ourselves. To kind of distill it to one person at a time was very difficult for them. And not everybody was interested in taking part in that, and I understand that. But I think seeing everything put together at the end, like Allison was saying, there's something about surviving, and something that's powerful and hopeful about the process. I think, we can make it through together. Everybody's individual efforts, I think it's a kind of a metaphor, as difficult as they were, have the power to take us on a journey, as Tift was saying. And I think all three pieces of music that we heard tonight feel like that to me, and hopefully transcend the process of the technology and the distance and the self-examination that all the musicians had to go through to make it come alive. That's my hope, is that it, we understand what everybody did, but it transcends that and takes us to another place together. Yeah. So with that,
I would just like to say
yes.
how grateful I am to be here with all four of you, and the work that all four of you are doing is so amazing. And I'm just really touched to be a part of this, and thank you. And thank you, Peter, for bringing us together.
Yeah, I'm very, very, very touched. It's been a long process for all of us. I think we can safely say that it's been a long process for all of us, whether we're involved with this music tonight or whether we're just living through the moments that we're living through. And I'm so grateful to you, Tift, and to you, Allison, for writing music which is just so honest and human, and powerful and hopeful. And also to you, Dr. Parker, for joining us for this and helping us, put it all in a context. I'm so grateful. And also to you, Deb. It's just a beautiful evening, and I think hopefully we'll all remember it for quite a while, and hopefully there's hope for the future, and we can have these memories to take us there. So thanks to everybody who made this possible. So grateful to everybody in the audience who tuned in, and thanks for sharing this time with us. Big love to everybody, and stay safe and stay healthy, and love one another. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.